This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Battle Mountain. The author, C.J. Box, from the number one New York Times bestselling author, the 25th Joe Pickett novel with a mixture of suspense, the outdoors, and family relationships at its core. Battle Mountain delivers the riveting Nate Romanowski story that fans have been clamoring for. Things didn't end well for the outlaw falconer and his family at the end of 3-inch Teeth in Battle Mountain. Nate is broken and fueled by revenge, and things are about to get a whole lot worse for everyone else. C.J. Box, the author of now 25 Joe Pickett novels, 8 standalone novels, and a story collection. He's won the Edgar, Anthony, Macavity, Gumshoe, and 2 Barry Awards, as well as the French Prix Calibre, 38th the Western Heritage Award for Literature, and 2 Spur Awards. An avid outdoorsman, Box has hunted, fished, hiked, ridden, and skied throughout Wyoming and the Mountain West. He has been executive producer on shows based on his books, including ABC TV's Big Sky and Joe Pickett on Paramount Plus. Happy to have back on this podcast, C.J. Box. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
So,
Thanks for having me.
number 25 for you in this series. Can you believe it?
That's no, I don't. No, I sometimes kind of slap myself and think I never knew there'd be a book two, certainly didn't look this far down the line, but I'm pleased that we're at 25. Pleased that the series has gone so well that each book has outsold the last one up to this point. I know there's gonna be some point where it stops, but so far it's been a good ride, and hope people like this one.
Well, it gets off to a very fast start here with Nate on the warpath, revenge for Nate Romanowski. Where did the idea for Battle Mountain come from?
Well, part of it certainly is, although I kind of look at all the books as standalones in a way, even though it's in a series of books. Battle Mountain is a continuation of a thread left open in the last book, 3-inch Teeth, where Nate Romanowski's family is destroyed by a guy, and Nate goes after. You know that Nate is going to go after him, so that thread continues on this one. But also, I always like to put different issues and news items and controversies in all of the books. And while Nate and his buddy Geronimo Jones are looking for Axel Soledad to take him down, Joe Pickett has an assignment from the governor to find his son-in-law, who's gone missing as an elk hunting guide in the mountains. So the book is told in 2 different narratives, totally separate, that then converge at the end.
And looming over both narratives, CJ, is an annual conclave of the American military industrial complex called the Centurions. Who are the
Yes.
Centurions?
Well, I of course fictionalized it, but it is based on a group. I live in South Central Wyoming. We have a little private airport here, and once a year, the airport fills with private jets. Little jets park under the wings of big jets, and it's all people who are involved in aeronautics and in the defense industry, and they're all members of a certain club, and they all go out to a very isolated dude ranch where they initiate new members and hang out and trade notes. And the joke has always been around here, all it would take is one bomb on that dude ranch to completely destroy the most of the industrial defense complex of the U.S. So I took that and fictionalized it, changed it up quite a bit, and had that be part of this as well.
What is Battle Mountain like?
The real Battle Mountain, it's not far from where I live. It's in the Sierra Madre range of Wyoming. It's called Battle Mountain because in the 1830s, a group of mountain men were besieged by American Indians, and they had a standoff and a fight. Most of the mountain men got off the mountain, but they called it from then on Battle Mountain where this occurred.
What's the one book that made you want to become a writer?
Oh, gee, there's several of them. I would probably have to say the one would be Catch 22 by Joseph Heller. That was the first, quote, adult novel I read as a young boy that really, really grabbed me. And I've since read it 4 times. I get something different out of it every time. But I think that's the one that made me think, man, if I could do this, that would be great.
Now, your father was an elementary school principal. Your mother was a teacher too. Did they inspire you, encourage you to write?
My dad certainly did. He was a big reader and used to read to us as kids. My mom wasn't much of a reader at all. In fact, even after I had a couple books published, she would say all she read was cookbooks.
Mhm.
But my dad certainly did include me in all this, and was very proud of me and collected every manuscript, and was very inspiring to me.
Your dad, you said, was a big reader. What was the book that made you fall in love with reading? Was
Oh,
there
it
one
was,
or two?
the first it's a series, when I was in used to ride my bike to the library, and remember the librarians there were able to gather up every Encyclopedia Brown book in the state of Wyoming and get it to me at some point or other. So I'd say that series inspired me a lot at that age, and that was probably 10 or 11 at that point.
Jeffrey Trachtenberg in the Wall Street Journal wrote a great article on you last month. I encourage you to search for that article. And it's interesting. Finding new readers is one of the biggest challenges facing writers, of course.
Mhm.
You are going after male readers, and you're doing it in an interesting way, doing podcasts like this and a lot more podcasts as well. How has that gone so far?
It's gone very well in terms of the fact that the readership has gone up. And what I started mentioning to my publisher that a lot more younger men were showing up at the book signings, which is kind of unusual. And I think a lot of that is because I've never turned down like a podcast or interview request from a lot of not necessarily like this is a book related podcast. There are so many out there. I've done podcasts with centered around rodeo, fly fishing, hunting, all sorts of subject matter. And like, for example, last year did the Meat Eater podcast, which is a very big podcast, and brought in a lot of younger male readers who I'd meet then on the road, who maybe found a series that appealed to them that they didn't know was out there. So I think it's I think it's doing not necessarily within the book industry, but reaching out beyond that.
And one of the podcasters quoted in the article said about you, he's got humility, he works, and he isn't a blowhard, which people can sniff out.
Yeah, I appreciated that. I'm glad he didn't say I was a blowhard. Yes.
What was the most, not to give away too much, what was the most exciting part of writing this story?
Oh, wow. Part of it was the dual storylines. I love doing that. That always keeps things fresh because you're alternating back and forth between two, what I think are pretty exciting storylines, three actually, to some degree. Um, that keeps it fresh, but also all of the action in the end of the book culminate very close to where our ranch is in Wyoming. And it's fun to be able to write about local landmarks and people and structures and hotels. It's always kind of exciting to do that, and also a little bit scary because I'm going to meet these people on the street later on. But it's fun to bring it right home.
How can aspiring authors, CJ, make their characters come alive? What's the trick? What's the secret?
Oh, I don't know. I think there's a lot of trick. Not I don't want to say tricks, techniques. I think one thing for writers to understand is that characters don't exist in your book simply to advance the narrative of the story. They're there for their own reasons. They have their own motivations, their own points of view. Um, and I think if you keep that in mind, the characters come across as much more realistic and interesting. Often I read books where you know that somebody's just been introduced to get you from point A to point B and no other reason. And I like to think of it, that they exist in this fictional world as real people.
What books might we be surprised to find on your nightstand?
Oh, wow.
We know what you're into.
Yeah, well, I'm currently reading it's a book called Four Shots in the Dark about the Troubles in Northern Ireland. I tend to read fiction, nonfiction, fiction, nonfiction,
Hmm.
and probably every fourth book is in the crime or mystery genre. Like to read very, very widely and different kinds of things. And I just finished a book I really liked about the Mountain Man era called, oh, I'm going to forget the name of it. It's by Clavin. I'll think of it here in a second. But it's about Jedediah Smith in the Mountain Man
Hmm.
era. That's an era I'm very interested in.
If you were organizing a literary dinner party, which three writers, dead or alive, would you want to hang out with and have a meal with?
I think Mark Twain,
Hmm.
certainly, early inspiration. Um, Joseph Heller would be interesting, although I think he'd be a little acerbic. Um, who else? Maybe somebody contemporary that I could bounce things off, like maybe like Michael Connelly. I had dinner with him 2 weeks ago, and we had a great time.
Hmm.
We found out we have a lot of similar tastes in things.
What is next for you in your writing? You have some more Joe Pickett in you?
Yep. Given the schedule of one every year, I have to, of course, start on the next one. So I'm well into the 26th Joe Pickett book, and it's really going well. I'm kind of almost disappointed I have to sit it aside for a while and go do a book tour because it's really going well. But that's what's next.
And more podcasts too, I'm sure.
Whenever I'm asked.
The new Box book out now is Battle Mountain. CJ, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back.
And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast.